Hello, and welcome to Eddie Hurst's podcast version of The War of the Worlds. It is me, the titular Eddie Hurst. And no, I will not make a joke about how the word titular sounds a little bit funny. I'm better than that. And quite frankly, so are you. Here we are, Chapter 2 of Book 2, What We Saw from the Ruined House. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. Thanks very much to Tom Burgess for being in it. And this chapter, I'm very excited to introduce the guests that we have coming on for a little chat. It is, as if you've read the title of the episode, you know, Rex Factor. They are, it's two guys, it's Graham and Ali. They do a podcast where they talk about monarchs of British history. Now, am I a huge monarch fan? Absolutely not. But are they a good way to learn about the history of Britain through the lens of its rulers? You know, seeing how individual foibles and personalities affect a whole country? Yeah. Also, very excited to throw in the new word that I've learned, foibles. Foibles. Sort of personal habits or idiosyncrasies, maybe seen in the negative light. This is a sponsored post for the word foibles. And are those guys funny and charming in the way that they do it? Yeah, absolutely. That's why I got them on the show. So you'll hear them a little bit later on talking about how Queen Victoria and King Edward would have dealt with a Martian invasion, as it's on the tips of everyone's lips. The tips of the lips. Also, we'll have a little song about a scullery. So brace yourself for that. We're going to go back in. The curate and, of course, the narrator are trapped in a ruined house, under siege in a way from the Martians. So let's see what they're up to. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It does really help other people find the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me for the second series. The first one had a great response, and I look forward to hearing what you think of this one. Be sure to let me know on Twitter at Eddie Hurst, or Instagram at the same, Facebook /EDY Hurst, or even send me an email if you want that privacy. It's just my name at gmail.com. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. Chapter 2. What We Saw from the Ruined House. After eating, we crept back to the scullery, and there I must have dozed again, for when presently I looked round I was alone. The thudding vibration continued with wearisome persistence. Wearisome? Where is it's like where is some, as if like, I think it's like being wary of something. Wearisome, I don't know if that's my accent, but I can, guys, it's wearisome. See, because it's not worrisome. You'd think it might be worrisome. It's not. It's not worrisome. It's wearisome. So, look, I hope that if you thought, oh, he sounded a bit uncomfy saying that, I did. You were right, I did. I whispered for the curate several times. The curate! Oi! And at last felt my way to the door of the kitchen. It was still daylight, and I perceived him across the room, lying against the triangular hole that looked out upon the Martians. His shoulders were hunched, so that his head was hidden from me. I mean, just try and do that so you can hunch your shoulders that high that your head's hidden from. Like, I'm not saying it's not possible, but man, that's what is it like? He's leaning forward. I can't get an idea of that. It's tough. That's going to be the TikTok challenge for this episode. If we were on TikTok, that makes me relevant with kids now, right? Right? Over by the dishes and the dryer, laundry, the plug part of our kitchen in the late 19th century. It's not used for cooking, it's for keeping sanitary. You know what I'm talking about. Come into my scullery. In the darkness of the scullery, a night of love and crockery. In the darkness of the scullery, a romance with last week's laundry. If your kitchen's overflowing, you need extra storage facility. I got a place to show ya. Take my hand and follow me into the darkness of the scullery. Can be used for bathing facilities. In the darkness you're living in the 19th century, you'd have that bit more space because you'd only have one part of your house plumbed, so you'd probably have your clothes washing done there and also your dishwashing. I could hear a number of noises, almost like those in an engine shed, and the place rocked with that beating thud. Through the aperture in the wall, I could see the top of a tree touched with gold and the warm blue of a tranquil evening sky. For a minute or so, I remained watching the curate, and then I advanced, crouching and stepping with extreme care amid the broken crockery that littered the floor.
I mean, the least the curate could have done is tidy up a little bit. I mean, be quiet about it, but what else is he doing? Sobbing and washing his brain?
I touched the curate's leg, and he started so violently that a mass of plaster went sliding down outside and fell with a loud impact. I gripped his arm, fearing he might cry out, and for a long time we crouched motionless. Then I turned to see how much of our rampart remained.
Yo, surf's up everybody. Hang loose. I'm just chilling at the beach. I figured out that life's too short to be worrying about who you are, grievances, so I've decided to take out my pension early and head and catch some waves. Rampart, that's what we're looking at here. Rampart could be one of two things. It's either a 2011 film starring Woody Harrelson or a defensive wall. I'm gonna guess maybe it's the film that's fallen down. Just a little joke there from me. The explaining lad. It is, of course, probably the defensive wall. Whoa, I'm just gonna do that thing where you go under the waves. Whee!
The detachment of the plaster had left a vertical slit open in the debris, and by raising myself cautiously across a beam, I was able to see out of this gap into what had been overnight a quiet suburban roadway. Vast, indeed, was the change that we beheld. The fifth cylinder must have fallen right into the midst of the house we had first visited. The building had vanished, completely smashed, pulverised, and dispersed by the blow.
Wells he's really getting his value out of that thesaurus he bought, isn't he, there?
The cylinder lay now far beneath the original foundations, deep in a hole, already vastly larger than the pit I had looked into in Woking. The earth all around it had splashed under the tremendous impact. Splashed is the only word, and lay in heaped piles that hid the masses of the adjacent houses. It had behaved exactly like mud under the violent blow of a hammer.
What? Who's hitting mud with a hammer? Like, I mean, I can picture it, but... What?
Our house had collapsed backward. The front portion, even on the ground floor, had been destroyed completely. By a chance, the kitchen and scullery had escaped, and stood buried now under soil and ruins, closed in by tons of earth on every side save towards the cylinder. Over that aspect, we hung now on the very edge of the great circular pit the Martians were engaged in making. The heavy beating sound was evidently just behind us, and ever and again a bright green vapour drove up like a veil across our peephole.
I mean, peephole strikes again, and it doesn't not sound funny at any point, does it? Oh, the peephole! Don't look at the peephole!
The cylinder was already opened in the centre of the pit, and on the farther edge of the pit, amid the smashed and gravel-heaped shrubbery, one of the great fighting machines, deserted by its occupant, stood stiff and tall against the evening sky.
Quick, now's your chance. Get over to it, press triangle, and you can steal it.
At first, I scarcely noticed the pit and the cylinder, although it has been convenient to describe them first, on account of the extraordinary glittering mechanism I saw busy in the excavation, and on account of the strange creatures that were crawling slowly and painfully across the heaped mould near it. The mechanism it certainly was that held my attention first.
Big shout out to Yoda for helping put that sentence order together there.
It was one of those complicated fabrics that have since been called handling machines, and the study of which has already given such an enormous impetus to terrestrial invention. As it dawned upon me first, it presented a sort of metallic spider with 5 jointed, agile legs, and with an extraordinary number of jointed levers, bars, and reaching and clutching tentacles about its body. Most of its arms were retracted, but with 3 long tentacles it was fishing out a number of rods, plates and bars which lined the covering and apparently strengthened the walls of the cylinder. These, as it extracted them, were lifted out and deposited upon a level surface of earth behind it. Its motion was so swift, complex and perfect that at first I did not see it as a machine, in spite of its metallic glitter. The fighting machines were coordinated and animated to an extraordinary pitch, but nothing compare with this. People who have never seen these structures, and have only the ill-imagined efforts of artists or the imperfect descriptions of such eyewitnesses as myself to go upon, scarcely realise that living quality.
This is a great little trick by any writer or author, and if you want to do it too, if you want to describe something but can't be bothered to actually describe or write about it, just say like it was so complex or so unimaginable that, I wouldn't be able to do it justice describing it. It's the perfect cop-out. The perfect cop-out.
I recall particularly the illustration of one of the first pamphlets to give a consecutive account of the war. The artist had evidently made a hasty study of one of the fighting machines, and there his knowledge ended. He presented them as tilted, stiff tripods, without either flexibility or subtlety, and with an altogether misleading monotony of effect. The pamphlet containing these renderings had a considerable vogue, and I mention them here simply to warn the reader against the impressions that they may have created. They were no more like the Martians I saw in action than a Dutch doll is like to a human being. To my mind, the pamphlet would have been much better without them.
I love this paragraph. It's great, isn't it? Because, one, it implies to us as readers that obviously he's writing this in the past tense, so not to give any spoilers away that you can't get, he's survived. He's survived to write this. But two, as the true narrator to himself, not only has he survived, he's also found ways to complain about other people who have survived getting things wrong. It's like, it is peak narrator that not only is he writing his own account, which he thinks is the definitive one, he's even dedicated time in his own book to slam his rivals that are made up. Like, Wells has just made them up. They're not real, and yet he's wanted to dunk on them.
At first, I say, the handling machine did not impress me as a machine, but as a crab-like creature with a glittering integument.
Radical, man. Oh, just a quick one, guys. Integument. It means like the tough outer layer. So like a crab has a tough outer layer. Even our skin counts as that. That's integument. Okay. Whoa.
The controlling Martian, whose delicate tentacles actuated its movements, seeming to be simply the equivalent of the crab's cerebral portion. But then I perceived the resemblance of its grey-brown, shiny, leathery integument to that of the other sprawling bodies beyond, and the true nature of this dexterous workman dawned upon me. With that realization, my interest shifted to those other creatures, the real Martians. Already I had a transient impression of these, and the first nausea no longer obscured my observation. Moreover, I was concealed and motionless, and under no urgency of action. They were, I now saw, the most unearthly creatures it is possible to conceive.
Oh, right, so he can describe the most unearthly thing he could possibly conceive, but when it comes to the structures, like, just a machine, that's too much. Fine, crack on. I'm not even bothered.
They were huge round bodies, or rather heads, about 4 feet in diameter, each body having, in front of it, a face. This face had no nostrils. Indeed, the Martians do not seem to have had any sense of smell, but it had a pair of very large, dark-coloured eyes, and just beneath this a kind of fleshy beak. In the back of this head or body, I scarcely know how to speak of it, was the single tight, tympanic surface.
Whoa! Cowabunga! Radical! I just saw somebody take a real gnarly wipe out! Tympanic, it's a type of surface, it's drum-like. Our eardrums have a tympanic surface. That's what it means, baby. Okay, I'm gonna go hang 20. What? That's 10 more than 10. This guy's a maniac. Hey guys, I'm a maniac. Whoa!
Since known to be anatomically an ear, though it must have been almost useless in our dense air. In a group round the mouth were 16 slender, almost whip-like tentacles, arranged in 2 bunches of 8 each. These bunches have since been named rather aptly by that distinguished anatomist, Professor Howe's, the hands.
The hands! The hands! But it's an interesting little tidbit here that Professor Howes was a real person. It was Professor G.B. Howes, who was a famous biologist and illustrator around this time. H.G. Wells was probably taught by him in some form because he was colleagues and personal friends with Thomas Huxley, who of course taught H.G. Wells biology at university. So just a little sprinkling of factual stuff there. Still though, do you remember when he said hands as if that was like the big shocker? That's funny, wasn't it?
Even as I saw these Martians for the first time, they seemed to be endeavouring to raise themselves on these hands. But of course, with the increased weight of terrestrial conditions, this was impossible. There is reason to suppose that on Mars they may have progressed upon them with some facility. The internal anatomy, I may remark here, as dissection has since shown, was almost equally simple. The greater part of the structure was the brain, sending enormous nerves to the eyes, ear, and tactile tentacles. Beside this were the bulky lungs, into which the mouth opened, and the heart and its vessels. The pulmonary distress caused by the denser atmosphere and greater gravitational attraction was only too evident in the convulsive movements of the outer skin. And this was the sum of the Martian organs. Strange as it may seem to a human being, all the complex apparatus of digestion, which makes up the bulk of our bodies, did not exist in the Martians. They were heads. Merely heads. Entrails they had none. They did not eat, much less digest.
But how do they poo? And eat and consume energy, I guess. Well, mainly the first one.
Instead, they took the fresh, living blood of other creatures and injected it into their own veins. I have myself seen this being done, as I shall mention in its place. But, squeamish as I may seem, I cannot bring myself to describe what I could not endure, even to continue watching. Let it suffice to say, blood obtained from a still living animal, in most cases from a human being, was run directly by means of a little pipette into the recipient canal.
Okay, this is a special song dedicated to those, giant horrible mosquitoes or gross, just head vampires. I call it digesting their ways. Entrails, they had none, they did not eat, much less digest. Instead, they took the fresh, living blood of other creatures and injected it into their own veins. I have myself seen this being done, as I shall mention in its place, but squeamish as I may seem, I cannot bring myself to describe what I could not endure, even to continue watching. Let it suffice to say blood obtained from a still living animal. Thank you. It's Thursday night, it's cocktail night. Please tip your waitresses, tip your tables, tip your hats, tip your coat, tip your car. Blood, he's gone crazy. Stop tipping stuff. He's tipping away, tipping too much. Somebody stop him, help, please.
The bare idea of this is no doubt horribly repulsive to us. But at the same time, I think that we should remember how repulsive our carnivorous habits would seem to an intelligent rabbit. The physiological advantages of the practice of injection are undeniable, if one thinks of the tremendous waste of human time and energy occasioned by eating and the digestive process. Our bodies are half made up of glands and tubes and organs, occupied in turning heterogeneous food into blood. The digestive processes and their reaction upon the nervous system sap our strength and colour our minds. Men go happy or miserable as they have healthy or unhealthy livers, or sound gastric glands. But the Martians were lifted above all these organic fluctuations of mood and emotion.
I mean, firstly, before we dive into this, a big shout out to before when he mentions the rabbits. That's a lovely little bring back to earth, the recurring theme that we see, of course, which is comparing man's conquest to the effects that it has on animal. And secondly, this is a peak scientist view, innit, that food's only for energy. I mean, imagine taking the narrator to a restaurant and being like, "Yeah, mate, this really expensive restaurant, it's really fancy, it's a Pizza Hut buffet, you can have as much as you want." And he turns around and he's like, "Well, it's a waste of time, innit? Waste of time. I'd rather be rather just inject it into me veins." All I'm saying is I'm not inviting him to a dinner party anytime soon.
Their undeniable preference for men as their source of nourishment is partly explained by the nature of the remains of the victims they had brought with them as provisions from Mars. These creatures, to judge from the shriveled remains that have fallen into human hands, were bipeds with flimsy, silicious skeletons, almost like those of the silicious sponges.
Hey, Duderinos, so I took a little bit more of a wipe out than I was anticipating, so I'm just on a little trip to the hospital, but don't worry about the old explaining ladster. So, what have we got? Silicious. Ooh, silicious. That's a fun word to say. So silicious, it's something that has silica in it, which is a mineral. It's like a sort of mineral that you get in some living organisms and some stones and things like that. So it's a type of, like, it's like a vitamin. Okay, see you later.
And feeble musculature, standing about 6 feet high and having round, erect heads, and large eyes in flinty sockets. 2 or 3 of these seem to have been brought in each cylinder, and all were killed before Earth was reached. It was just as well for them, for the mere attempt to stand upright upon our planet would have broken every bone in their bodies.
Yes, what a sweet mercy indeed. I'm sure they were really glad that they had all of the life sucked out of them, as opposed to being on a planet that they might have been okay on. Of those options, definitely the former is the one that I would take too. Pop me in a cylinder! Give 'em a straw!
Hey guys, thank you very much for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you on as together as Rex Factor. Please could you introduce yourselves as in first and even last name if you want. I mean, I'll leave that up to you.
I'm Graham Duke, which everybody always hears, and then Ali is Ali Hood.
I'm often Ali. Well, not even Ali. Alan Head, Hood.
Sure.
No, that's right.
That's your name.
That is my name. No,
The disbelief someone's got your name right. It's a lot to take in.
Wood. That was what I was going for. Always got wood. Hang on. My name is Ali Hood.
And it's wonderful to have you guys on. Thank you very much for coming on my very silly War of the Worlds based podcast. Your podcast is an excellent look at monarchs of England and Scotland and beyond. I thought, who better to ask about hypothetical questions of Martian invasions compared to historic monarchs of the time than you guys. So within the book at this time, there's 2 monarchs it could potentially be. The first one is Queen Victoria, and the second one is Edward VII, because whilst the book was written in 1897, it's set in like the beginning of the 20th century. It's not specific which year it is. So I wanted to ask you guys a bit about whether either of them ever planned to fight Martians.
That's one for you, Graham.
Ali, do you want to cover this one, Ali?
Depends what you in an Alien. We definitely had Harold was definitely preparing for a foreign invasion, wasn't he?
1066.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, they must have updated the battle plan since then.
I guess if we start with Victoria first and then go on to Edward, what was her role as a monarch? Was she particularly hands-on?
It sort of changes over time a bit. We're into what you'd call a sort of period of constitutional monarchy. So we're no longer at the sort of Henry VIII stage where you've got absolute power and you can just have people's heads lopped off if they start to irritate you and you need a new spouse or child. But she still has a certain amount of power and influence. So particularly sort of with the politicians, with the prime ministers, she'll be expressing her opinions quite forcefully. She can technically choose who the prime minister is, but that's really now dictated by elections. So it's not a formal ruling as such, but still very influential and powerful.
So she'd probably have had something to say.
Yeah, she'd have had opinions, and she was a very opinionated person, very stubborn. So once she'd got something into her head and she decided on it, then that's very much what she is going to pursue.
What does she say about other wars?
She's quite into war when it gets going. She's quite an enthusiast for the war. She gets very excited about it.
But I mean, could she say, I don't like the Brazilians, go and have a go at them? Or conversely, could she say, stop fighting the
She could
Russians?
say it, but she would, I suppose, technically, she could order it, but realistically, she can just say it and hope that the prime minister will do what she says. But
so that's like now only she wouldn't actually say it. So there's just like a level of not. Sorry, this isn't our podcast.
These are the questions that I'm asking too. So please ask them.
Oh dear, I'm the expert. So it's actually just there's just a bit of like there's a gagging order on the monarchy now that there wasn't then.
Yeah, and as I say, I think Elizabeth II probably, I mean, she'd ask pertinent questions about things and she might give a bit of opinion, but I don't think she would be as forceful as to say this is complete nonsense. Whereas I think when Victoria and Gladstone were sat opposite each other, I don't think Gladstone was left in any doubt if Victoria didn't agree with something he was doing.
I don't know if it's more or less reassuring that the Queen we have now would refuse to comment on Martians invading.
Yeah.
There was loads of conquest during these guys, their reigns. So clearly they weren't against like violence. They weren't completely pacifist. But I wonder, that's part of the book, isn't it? That it's such a strange idea for Britain itself to be invaded around this time.
Yeah, because there's a lot of paranoia sort of early 20th century, end of the 19th century about Germany as a rising military power.
Right,
and you get sort of things like Riddle in the Sands. Is it this sort of idea of like Germans sort of secretly coming over to try and open up an invasion or stuff? So there's a lot of fears of that in Britain, where previously they would say we've not been invaded since 1066, which is sort of true, sort of not quite true. And thus there's this great pride at Britain not being able to be invaded. So yeah, the idea of Martians suddenly turning up would be a bit of a shock to the system.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, at the best, even if they're friendly, yeah,
at any time really. But
so what about if, when we get into the Edwardian period? What was Edward like in relation to that?
He doesn't have quite as much. I mean, he's not there for as long. Obviously, Victoria's there for over 60 years as queen, whereas Edward's not quite 10 years as king. Yeah, I mean, both him and Victoria are they're sort of unusually forward-thinking, like in terms of sort of race relations and stuff like that. Neither of them are racist, and they sort of quite abhor sort of use of racist language. They're quite protective of the people in their empire. Yeah. So they sort of view it as a kind of a paternalistic thing. They thinking, oh, we've got all these nations that we're looking after. They're all part of our family. So they don't see it as being sort of Alexander the Great rampaging across half of the world and conquering it through military might. They sort of think, well, we're just bringing everybody under the happy, happy flag of Britain.
Because
and keeping them all safe.
Yeah, I guess they were thinking more of it's that narrative of them going over and sort of educating and saving, which is quite problematic, but back then was the benevolent way to go about it, I suppose.
Yeah, that's what they would have thought. So they wouldn't have been sort of very ardently militaristic in terms of conquering other people.
Right.
Even though that's technically what they were doing.
Is us or the French? Is probably what they're thinking. We can't let the French have it, goodness sake.
So I guess was there much homeland defence around this time?
Yeah, so there certainly wasn't any until, let's say, that bit of paranoia about Germany, which wasn't, I think, realistic in terms of actually them invading at that point. There wasn't really any threat to mainland Britain. They don't even actually have that many conflicts with the other countries in Europe. I think under Victoria's reign, it's only the Crimean War,
Right.
Which is sort of obviously over in Crimea and fighting with Russia. Otherwise, it's all India, Africa, parts of Asia. There's nothing that's actually really threatening Britain at home.
Right, sure.
We've got the home fleet, haven't we, for keeping
Yeah, and they're
the
completely
North
dominant.
Atlantic and that
The
sort of
Navy is dominant. It's the most powerful Navy in the world. So they obviously can control the channel. Other than the Martians, nobody's able to come over in the air
Right.
to invade.
Yeah.
Mind you, if it's the area we're talking about, you could get some of those ships up the Thames and they'd probably sort it out a bit.
Well, yeah, if the Vikings had been around, they'd have been straight up those rivers, wouldn't they?
We could have got, so well, they got HMS, what's it called up there? HMS Belfast.
Sure.
We could have got one of our dreadnoughts at the time up and pummeling Woking.
I mean, it would have been a bad move strategically when the Martians invade for the Navy to just start barraging their own cities.
Well, I don't know. If you can't destroy what isn't there, right? That's take it out, take the control, do a sort of psyops thing. If you take it out of their hands, maybe you'll disempower them.
That's what Robert the Bruce did actually when he has to take Scotland back from the English. They just take various areas and then just waste the entire countryside.
Oh, right, wow. Like
of their own country, but it means that the English can't feed themselves and all that sort of stuff.
There you go. I'm just Robert the Bruce.
Which monarch do you think would have been best at dealing with a Martian invasion?
I think the thing for Edward VII is he was sort of quite notorious for his what you might call his sexcapades.
Right. Okay.
He was quite into his sort of adult entertainment. So his first reaction would probably be to try to mate with it.
Okay. Fair enough.
He was sort of known as Bonking Bertie and Edward the Caresser were a couple of his nicknames.
Right.
But otherwise, he had a bit of a tendency to die just before. Well, I mean, he did it once, to be fair, as a tendency. But
And you don't live that down.
he dies when stuff's about to go down, really. So, like, there's a constitutional crisis going on with a budget between the Liberals and the Conservatives, and then it's 4 years before the First World War. So he really just has sort of a decade of happy living and peace and tranquility and bathroom antics with French courtesans, and then pops his clogs and leaves it for somebody else to deal with. So I guess maybe Victoria's the one that's actually got a track record of seeing through major conflicts, which is what Edward doesn't have because of the whole dying thing.
Yeah, which would get in the way.
I sort of see those two as one great big life of the British Empire, where Victoria did, well, she got other people to do the actual work, and then Edward managed to live the retirement of nothing really going on, just having fun. And then he died, and with it starts the first cracks in the empire with the First World War.
Yeah.
Although, arguably they're bigger afterwards.
But Victoria's very strong on stuff. When the wars during her reign are there, she's a strong figure on it. So there was time in the Boer War when Britain has suffered a few defeats. This is right at the end of her reign. But I can't. What year is War of the Worlds written?
1897.
All published.
So I think he was influenced by the Boer Wars. I know his brother went over to South Africa, and I think was affected in some way by the Boer War stuff that was happening.
So and it starts badly for Britain. Again, this is one where they would have expected to win very, very easily, and then they suffer these quite humiliating defeats early on. So when the Prime Minister Balfour was quite dispirited about how everything was going, Victoria told him that to please understand that there is no one depressed in this house. We are not interested in the possibilities of defeat. They do not exist. So once the war started, once the Martians have come over, Victoria's not going to roll over.
Right, okay.
And she knitted, did she knit hats for kids or something?
No, for the soldiers.
Oh, yeah, that
probably
makes
more
more sense,
usefully
but...
for a war.
Yeah.
Yeah, she knitted them socks, gloves, hats, and sent bars of chocolate.
Oh, that's nice. It's a nice thing to do for your soldiers. I mean, it's the least you can do, really, isn't it? Give them a hat. The monarchy is sort of not mentioned at all. Like Queen Victoria, I suppose part of the writing for it is there's no specifics of monarch action or the monarchy in here, and I guess that's probably to be expected because it would be the government more having a role if anyone was to. It's not like Queen Victoria would be coming out of Buckingham Palace with a baseball bat
on horseback. Actually, how would she choose to fight it? Because I've seen pictures of her with a rifle, shooting a rifle, but was she into hunting? Because I can't imagine her hunting. She's more complaining and writing in a diary type.
She did do a lot of complaining and writing in a diary.
I think it was testing the rifling or something, and she could hit a target 200 yards away.
At least she's bringing something to the table. She's
God.
contributing something, and that is being a sure shot.
Yeah, she can be our marksman.
She'll cover the retreat. Everyone else gets to Paris, and Victoria will just pick them off.
Yeah, she wouldn't be seen dead in Paris.
Whereas Edward VII, to be, I mean, that's,
Yeah,
that's the problem.
exactly. He'd
Edward
have been the
VII would be
first
in
out.
Paris.
Yeah.
He'd be on the boat, the first boat going over, wouldn't he?
Maybe saying, God, you managed to get away from the Martians. Martians?
I mean, yeah, credit to Edward for choosing to make love rather than war, first off. But Ali and Graham, thank you so much for coming on. Please, can you let people know about Rex Factor, about where they can find you, about where they can listen and all of that stuff?
Yeah, so if you basically any podcast provider, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever you use, if you just search for Rex Factor, then you'll find us. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Rex Factor Pod, and the Rex Factor Podcast Facebook page.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks for having us.
And while I am engaged in this description, I may add in this place certain further details which, although they were not all evident to us at the time, will enable the reader who is unacquainted with them to form a clearer picture of these offensive creatures. In 3 other points, their physiology differed strangely from ours. Their organisms did not sleep, any more than the heart of man sleeps. Since they had no extensive muscular mechanism to recuperate, that periodical extinction was unknown to them. They had little or no sense of fatigue, it would seem. On Earth they could never have moved without effort. Yet even to the last they kept in action. In 24 hours they did 24 hours of work, as even on Earth is perhaps the case with the ants. In the next place, wonderful as it seems in a sexual world, the Martians are absolutely without sex, and therefore without any of the tumultuous emotions that arise from that difference among men. A young Martian, there can now be no dispute, was really born upon Earth during the war, and it was found attached to its parent, partially budded off, just as young lily bulbs bud off, or like the young animals in the freshwater polyp. In man, in all higher terrestrial animal, such a method of increase has disappeared, but even on this Earth it was certainly the primitive method. Among the lower animals, up even to those first cousins of the vertebrated animals, the tunicates, the 2 processes occur side by side. But finally, the sexual method superseded its competitor altogether. On Mars, however, just the reverse has apparently been the case. It is worthy of remark that a certain speculative writer of quasi-scientific repute, writing long before the Martian invasion, did forecast for man a final structure not unlike the actual Martian condition. His prophecy, I remember, appeared in November or December 1893, in a long-defunct publication, the Pall Mall Budget, and I recall a caricature of it in a pre-Martian periodical called Punch. He pointed out, writing in a foolish, facetious tone, that the perfection of mechanical appliances must ultimately supersede limbs. The perfection of chemical devices, digestion, that such organs as hair, external nose, teeth, ears and chin were no longer essential parts of the human being, and that the tendency of natural selection would lie in the direction of their steady diminution through the coming ages. The brain alone remained a cardinal necessity. Only one other part of the body had a strong case for survival, and that was the hand, the teacher and agent of the brain. While the rest of the body dwindled, the hands would grow larger.
I just wanted to dive in at this point and say that certain speculative writer of quasi-scientific repute, it's actually an article written by H.G. Wells a few years before War of the Worlds was published. It's and when you see the picture of it, it is like it's something. So I had a little look to find like what article was published at that time, and it's called The Man of the Year Million. So you can go and have a look at this if you want. But the picture is nuts. It's like a big head with like an arse. He's got his arse in the air. The legs are tied up. He's wearing little shorts. It's. I mean, I can't do it. I can't do it justice. I can't do the picture justice. It's mad. Like if you imagine that's sort of what he thought the Martians look a bit like. It's something. It's something, all right. But you can read the whole article if you want. If not, it's basically just what he said there, but he's having a bit of a tongue-in-cheek cross-promotion, the cheeky bugger. And who can blame him, you know? Who can blame him? It's his book. He can do what he wants.
There is many a true word written in jest. And here in The Martians we have beyond dispute the actual accomplishment of such a suppression of the animal side of the organism by the intelligence. To me it is quite credible that the Martians may be descended from beings not unlike ourselves, by a gradual development of brain and hands, the latter giving rise to the two bunches of delicate tentacles at last, at the expense of the rest of the body. Without the body, the brain would, of course, become a mere selfish intelligence, without any of the emotional substratum of the human being. The last salient point in which the systems of these creatures differed from ours was in what one might have thought a very trivial particular. Microorganisms, which cause so much disease and pain on Earth, have either never appeared upon Mars, or Martian sanitary science eliminated them ages ago. 100 diseases, all the fevers and contagions of human life, consumption, cancers, tumours and such morbidities never enter the scheme of their life. And speaking of the differences between the life on Mars and terrestrial life, I may allude here to the curious suggestions of the red weed. Apparently the vegetable kingdom in Mars, instead of having green for the dominant colour, is of a vivid blood-red tint. At any rate, the seeds which the Martians, intentionally or accidentally, brought with them gave rise in all cases to red-coloured growths. Only that known popularly as the red weed, however, gained any footing in competition with terrestrial forms. The red creeper was quite a transitory growth, and few people have seen it growing. For a time, however, the red weed grew with astonishing vigour and luxuriance. It spread up the sides of the pit by the third or fourth day of our imprisonment, and in its cactus-like branches formed a carmine fringe to the edges of our triangular window. And afterwards I found it broadcast throughout the country, and especially wherever there was a stream of water. The Martians had what appeared to be an auditory organ, a single round drum at the back of the head body, and eyes with a visual range not very different from ours, except that, according to Phillips, blue and violet were as black to them. It is commonly supposed that they communicated by sounds and tentacular gesticulation. This is asserted, for instance, in the able but hastily compiled pamphlet, written evidently by someone not an eyewitness of the Martian actions, to which I have already alluded, and which, so far, have been the chief source of information concerning them. Now, no surviving human being saw so much of the Martians in action as I did. I take no credit to myself for such an accident, but the fact is so. And I assert that I watched them closely time after time, and that I have seen 4, 5, and once 6 of them sluggishly performing the most elaborately complicated operations together without either sound or gesture.
Alright, so we're finally sort of getting a reason why the narrator is the one telling us this story. Like, you know, is he the best person qualified for this job? No. Is he the bravest person in the Martian War? No. Is he the most entertaining person to tell this story? No. But was he the only one that survived and seemed to have got most of an eyeful of a Martian? Yes. Yes, that is why he's doing this. And I think that kind of gives this a bit more colour to this story and a bit more sophistication, which Wells should get some... I think Wells deserves some credit for it, because, you know, he's not a particularly likeable character, but that's kind of the point of him, right? He's just meant to be like this idiot out of his depth, and that's, I guess, he's a stand-in metaphor for Earth there. Maybe we'll do a metaphor alert. I tell you what, let's crack a metaphor alert here. That's been a while, hasn't it?
Metaphor alert. Metaphor alert.
There we go, it's been a while since we've had that, hasn't it? That's quite nice to get that back in there. Welcome back to Series 2.
Their peculiar hooting invariably preceded feeding. It had no modulation, and was, I believe, in no sense a signal, but merely the expiration of air preparatory to the suctional operation. I have a certain claim to at least an elementary knowledge of psychology, and in this matter I'm convinced, as firmly as I'm convinced of anything, that the Martians interchanged thoughts without any physical intermediation, and I have been convinced of this in spite of strong preconceptions. Before the Martian invasion, as an occasional reader here or there may remember, I had written with some little vehemence against the telepathic theory.
I mean, let's just take a minute right now to appreciate just how badass the Martians sound, right? They're like floating heads, like floating big octopus psychic vampires. And it is great, isn't it? Like, you know, psychic vampires is cool, but then you've got like a big octopus as well. Like, ooh, creepy psychic octopus vampire.
The Martians wore no clothing. Their conceptions of ornament and decorum were necessarily different from ours. And not only were they evidently much less sensible of changes of temperature than we are, but changes of pressure do not seem to have affected their health at all seriously. Yet though they wore no clothing, it was in the other artificial additions to their bodily resources that their great superiority over man lay. We men, with our bicycles and road skates, our Lilienthal soaring machines, our guns and sticks and so forth, are just the beginning of the evolution that the Martians have worked out.
So I just wanted to jump in with the Lilienthal soaring machines bit. That is a reference to, at the time he was writing this, this German inventor called Karl Wilhelm Otto Lilienthal, or Otto Lilienthal. So he was a big pioneer of aviation. He became known as the Flying Man. That's what the first line of Wikipedia says. But he's sort of like the Wright brothers, only before the Wright brothers, and there wasn't a motor on it. So, you know, they look a bit fantastical. They're cool. They're very cool. They're like these sort of you know the idea of those like Da Vinci illustrations with the big wings and that. That's what he did. He was the person who turned those into a reality. So I mean, he's quite cool, but definitely if you're comparing the flight of him on Earth to the flight that the Martians have succeeded, it's not the same, is it? Not the same. But you know, there we go. Just colouring the old canvas of your brain for you.
They have become practically mere brains, wearing different bodies according to their needs, just as men wear suits of clothes and take a bicycle in a hurry or an umbrella in the wet. And of their appliances, perhaps nothing is more wonderful to a man than the curious fact that what is the dominant feature of almost all human devices and mechanism is absent. The wheel is absent. Among all the things they brought to Earth, there is no trace or suggestion of their use of wheels. One would have at least expected it in locomotion. And in this connection it is curious to remark that even on this Earth nature has never hit upon the wheel, or has preferred other expedients to its development.
I mean, big wheel talk from Wells here. Big wheel lad. I'm here for it. The wheel, so they may be big old floating psychic heads with no clothes, only one big drum ear on the back of its noggin. But if you think they're all that, well, guess what? They got no wheels. So, good luck rolling with the punches. Get it? Roll. Sorry. Anyway, it's of all the things to decide not to give them, it's quite the wheel. That's what they don't get. Ha! You can take our freedom, but you'll never take our wheels. I mean, the narrator would probably be well up for a world without wheels, because it means he doesn't have a bike anymore.
And not only did the Martians either not know of, which is incredible, or abstain from, the wheel, but in their apparatus singularly little use is made of the fixed pivot or relatively fixed pivot. With circular motion, they're about confined to one plane. Almost all the joints of the machinery present a complicated system of sliding parts moving over small but beautifully curved friction bearings. And while upon this matter of detail, it is remarkable that the long leverages of their machines are in most cases actuated by a sort of sham musculature of the discs in an elastic sheath, these discs become polarized and drawn closely and powerfully together when traversed by a current of electricity.
I can't figure out. I mean, there's a lot to take on there. You can go back and listen again if you want to try and get an idea of it. Just no wheels. That's what I'd take from it. There's no wheels. It works differently. They're aliens. Get over it.
In this way, the curious parallelism to animal motions, which was so striking and disturbing to the human beholder, was attained. Such quasi-muscles abounded in the crab-like handling machine which, on my first peeping out of the slit, I watched unpacking the cylinder. It seemed infinitely more alive than the actual Martians lying beyond it in the sunset light, panting, stirring ineffectual tentacles, and moving feebly after their vast journey across space. While I was still watching their sluggish motions in the sunlight, and noting each strange detail of their form, the curate reminded me of his presence by pulling violently at my arm. I turned to a scowling face and silent, eloquent lips. He wanted the slit, which permitted only one of us to peep through, and so I had to forgo watching them for a time while he enjoyed that privilege.
Ugh, hate it when you have to share.
When I looked again, the busy handling machine had already put together several of the pieces of apparatus it had taken out of the cylinder into a shape having an unmistakable likeness to its own, and down on the left a busy little digging mechanism had come into view, emitting jets of green vapour and working its way round the pit, excavating and embanking in a methodical and discriminating manner. This it was which had caused the regular beating noise and the rhythmic shocks that had kept our ruinous refuge quivering. It piped and whistled as it worked. So far as I could see, the thing was without a directing Martian at all.
What are they building? Such intrigue, such questions. Will we find out?
I bloody hope so. Imagine if they just left it. I mean, what would that? Why would he do that? Seems like he's deliberately said, "Look, we're gonna find. Don't worry about it. That. Don't worry about it. We'll find out in a couple of weeks when we get Chapter 3, the days of imprisonment." So it sounds like they're not going anywhere for a bit. At least next chapter. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Please subscribe to the podcast. And also, if you want to give it a share on social media and that, you can tag me in at Eddie Hurst on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere you go. Also, I'd like to this episode say a big thank you to Jason Cooke, who's made some amazing techno synthy tracks. He's a friend of mine who does a lot of analog synthesizer stuff, and I think it's amazing what you can do with the modular synths. And he also runs the legendary open mic night in Manchester, Comedy Balloon. It's award-winning, which is really something for an open mic. That is coming back into the real world on the 25th of August at the Ape and Apple in Manchester.
Why not go down if you want to see some comedians shaking off some rust? Some people maybe who have made resolutions after lockdown to come and perform. So,
It was a real treat that he was keen to make some backing. So be sure to keep an ear out, because this is not the last you've heard of him. A lot of keeping an ear out in this intro and outro, but hey, just keep your ears out. I mean, don't keep them in. That sounds uncomfortable. Ugh, horrible image. Anyway, see you in a couple of weeks for Chapter 3, the days of imprisonment.
Who and what is Angel and May? Is it a detective story?
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
And what about spacecraft and lasers?
Are you going to fit in that old suit?
Does it have complex and convoluted crime elements?
Girl, I really, really need a decent coffee.
Why is that pub run by a Russian?
You're obviously new to town then.
Is there explosive ranting?
Here goes.
And what about those drag queens?
Oh, leather. So manly and strong.
Well, you're only gonna know if you listen to it, ain't you?